Okay, so now it's officially just starting to go live on all the different channels. And so I'll go to my LinkedIn profile here, and then I will paste a link.
Mine or Ketchum's or both?
Yeah, you can put it. You can put it wherever you want. It's a link, so wherever you want the link to go is where people will be able to find it. Okay, so here it is. Hi everyone, I see a couple people joining. We're gonna get started in just a minute. Just getting a link over to them so that they can share it as well. But hello everyone who's joining, and give us just 1 second.
Are you emailing it or link?
I'll put it in the chat right here if that's easier for you.
All right, yeah, I don't see it come through yet.
So I will put it. Where's the private chat? There we go. Private chat. Let me know if you saw that.
Yeah, I'm on my iPad, so I don't see it there either. All right, let me be careful.
Another option is for anybody who goes to my LinkedIn page. You'll be able to find it. I can email it to you. Do you want me to email you the link?
Yeah, email it, and then my assistant can do it while we're talking.
Okay, 1 second. I will send this to you right now. And hello, everyone. I see more people joining. Hello. Give us just 1 second. Logistics. But at least you can see kind of the behind the scenes before we start talking. That we got to figure stuff out.
Exactly.
Okay, so I will send this to you. Do you want me to send it to Alicia, to Kara?
Yeah, both of them would be perfect.
Okay. So here's to Alicia, to Kara. Okay, cool. I just sent it to them, and then that's a link to the LinkedIn post, which is usually where most people watch it.
Perfect.
All right, so let me close that, and I will open up my LinkedIn as well, just so I can see all of your guys' comments. So we're live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Periscope for those watching on Twitter. So it's live everywhere. Okay, let me open this up. Okay, cool. So everything's working. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. So Barry, are you ready to jump in?
I'm ready.
All right, cool. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of the Future of Work Show with Jacob Morgan. Those of you who are live, welcome. You get to see it before the podcast actually airs in a couple weeks. And my very special guest today is Barri Rafferty, and she's the CEO of a company that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Ketchum. Barri, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
So we're going to be talking about all sorts of really cool stuff. But and by the way, for people watching and listening, Barri was one of the CEOs I interviewed for my upcoming book, The Future Leader. And she gave me a lot of really interesting insights and ideas and stories in there. So I thought it would be fun to also have her as a podcast guest and to interview her live. And before we jump into that stuff, I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about you, going even like way back. Like how did you grow up? Where did you grow up? How did you get involved with Ketchum and being in PR?
So I grew up in the South, which nobody really thinks I have a Southern accent, but I always say my father was from Brooklyn and my mother was born and raised in Atlanta. So we're three girls and we all kind of ended up in the middle. But I didn't even know what public relations was. I went to undergrad at Tulane and got an English major and psychology degree. And then I did an internship at the Superdome, and that led to my career in communications.
Wow, internship at the Superdome.
I did. It was in their travel and tourism department for New Orleans, and I still love it down there and try to go. I never try to either Jazz Fest or French Quarter Fest. You can find me there for sure.
Very cool. And how did that eventually lead to Ketchum, to even becoming CEO of Ketchum?
So I went to graduate school in Boston University, and those tours that they take you on to New York, I actually came to Ketchum on my tour to New York to visit a lot of agencies and Burson Marsteller. And so I ended up taking a job at Burson Marsteller out of school. It was my first big agency job. and then went from big agency to the client side, went to Slim Fast Foods when it was still a privately held company. At the time, owned by a man named Danny Abraham, who also founded Thompson Medical. So started in that kind of diet and weight loss area when it was $1 million a day worth of powder. And Tommy Lasorda was probably the first guy ever on a diet.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that.
So did a lot of firsts back then, put Pound, Wisconsin on a diet, had a lot of fun there. And then they moved the company to Florida. And I was about to buy an apartment and was like, oh my gosh, I have to find a job. And I ended up going to a great boutique called Lippy Taylor and really learned a lot about masks and cosmetics and beauty. And then my first boss at Burson Marsteller, Rob Flaherty, called me for lunch and he said, let's go to Les Pinas, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was like a way fancier restaurant than we would ever usually go to. And said to me, you have to come to Ketchum. He had ended up here and I built my career really here. Had every job on the org chart. I always say I didn't do it the easy way. I've run a P&L. Like the first office I actually ran was our Atlanta office. So ran Atlanta and Dallas before taking over the New York office way back when.
So how long have you been at Ketchum now?
I've been at Ketchum for 24 years.
Wow.
I know this generation is like, whoever does that. But I really was able to reinvent myself multiple times. And I had a global brand practice job when my kids were small, truthfully, and wasn't working for me. And that's when I went to run a P&L because it was the time where now we're doing this right on my iPad in the middle of, wherever. But in those days, if you had a call like this, you had an IT person and you were in the office at 9:00 at night for it to be 9 in the morning and trying to pray that the, call worked. And two small kids, that wasn't totally working for me and all the travel. But the good news is I went to run a P&L and kind of from there had a route to CEO that's been interesting. I mean, one of the pieces of advice I give to people is just put yourself out of your comfort zone and volunteer for things. I volunteered to run our digital business when I was running the New York office, and they all said to me, well, what do you know about digital? And my point was, what does anyone know about digital at the time? So kind of was always game to try new things and be a learner and be a pioneer a bit, even kind of, I call it entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So for people who are not familiar with Ketchum, can you give a little bit of background information about the company? How big are you guys? Anything that you want people to know about the brand?
Sure. So we're a global communications consultancy. I've had the pleasure this year of being everywhere from Mumbai to Hong Kong and Shanghai to London, Germany.
Lots of travel.
US, a lot of travel. Yeah, I'm definitely diamond on Delta this week. So there you go. But the truth is, what I love about this business is we really have evolved from a public relations agency into a full 360 communications. If you look at the work we do today, we're earned at the core, but we're really a great combination of analytics and creative because I'm sure, as you know, right, you got to build in and find that audience.
Yep.
So spending a lot of time on the front end on targeting who the audience is, what they're watching, what they're listening to, how to reach them, what their path to purchase is, and then how they engage with all kinds of content. And we specialize in earned content, and that can be through earned media, through influencers. It can be through a ton of social channels, right? Paid channels, owned channels, for corporations, for nonprofits, for all kinds of organizations. So today we develop as much content, and down the hall from me here, I have 9, I think in New York now, 9 full-time video producers, animators.
Wow.
And we have people like that all over the world, and we're doing really end-to-end to full social commerce, which we're seeing a lot of in Asia and kind of bringing this way as well. So it's been an interesting ride. And then we do all the reputation work as well. So issues and crises. And
there's been a lot of those lately.
Yeah, it's good for us when our clients can't stay out of trouble.
So
bad part of the business either.
How many employees do you guys have?
So we have about 2,500 employees.
Wow.
We're a people business. I mean, we primarily bill like consultants on an hourly basis. So our, workforce and talent are really what make up our company and what we have to offer.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your leadership style? How would you describe your leadership style to somebody you just met?
Yeah, so I mean, my goal is to bring out the best in the people that work for me. So I feel like as a leader, I'm very much of a coach. I move really fast, so I have to trust the people around me, and I really encourage us to all collaborate and work together. We have a lot of debate on any leadership team I ever have. I always think if people aren't debating and pushing back on me, and there's not a few raised voices or curse words every now and then, that it's probably not a good thing, right? We've got to get in it. But we lock arms when we get out. And I also think I'm a very nurturing leader too, in a lot of ways. I still write birthday and anniversary cards, do personal gifts for the holidays.
Really? Wow.
I do. If you turned around here, you'd see all different size bags with cards attached. I write a lot of cards as I travel. I grew up in the South. I do a lot of handwritten notes. I have to admit, I still like a good card.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, you don't hear that often, that many CEOs still spend the time to do that. How did you learn to lead? Is it something that you studied, you took courses in, or did you kind of have to evolve your leadership style over time? And maybe you can talk about how it's evolved, if it has evolved.
So I think it has evolved a lot, and I think all of the above, right? I think sometimes you learn a lot from the best bosses you have, and sometimes from the worst bosses you have, what you want to be and what you don't want to be. I often say one of the hardest things for me to learn and was that it's better to be trusted than to be liked. And I think particularly as women, we grow up and there's a lot of peer pressure, right, to be in that crowd and be liked. And as you go up the ranks, sometimes you have to make tough decisions. And I remember when I went to run the Atlanta office, it was post the Olympics, post the .com bust, and I had to go in and make some really hard decisions on how we were going to move forward and lay people off, and getting people engaged and walking them through the process and understand what I was doing and how we were moving forward and what that vision was going to be, and bringing people along was a great learning for me. So I think through all those experiences, you become better. I've learned as a communicator, you can never communicate enough.
Yeah.
It's just, you need to communicate it and communicate it again and communicate it in different channels and different forms, particularly when you're trying to change an organization, as we've been doing over the last few years. And to be really present. I think that you have to, I still work with clients. I'm in the business because I think people value me because of that. And we did a worldwide call yesterday. I do my worldwide calls on Workplace, so they're live with video. Wow. And we went all over the world and shared kind of our proudest moments from the year. But what the first slide I started with was pictures of me with our people and with clients from all over the world. And I talked about that really being in it with them is how I learn. I see what clients are buying. I see what's winning awards. I see where frustrations are in our own organization and with our clients, where the gaps are and what we need to create and productize. So I think you got to be out there and be in it with our people in order to be a good leader.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I don't think we have enough human leaders who are out there. When you think about sort of work now, obviously you have a workforce of 2,500 people. What are you hearing from them as far as what they care about most at work, what they value? What are they asking you for as far as like how to create a great place for them to show up every day?
So we do Glint Pulse surveys actually 3 times a year. And the last 2 years, we've launched full-time. We have flexibility year-round, wherever you work in the world. And it's the number one thing by far that people say on our employee survey they value at the agency. It took us really about 6 months to allow people to understand what that meant. And people had good intentions. I went to our DC office, and at one point they were like, well, we've given everyone 1 day to work from home a week. And I'm like, no, that's not full flexibility. But it really means now that, I have young people out here, they do early morning monitoring for clients. They come in early at like 7 in the morning. So the clients have the report before 9, and they're at the gym from 9 to 10:30 and back in the office at 10:30. Some of our people are showing up at 9:30 because they drop their kids to school. Some people are working from home. One of my favorite at Thanksgiving, a mom came up to me who was here and said to me, I am so happy you have flexibility because we see our daughter so much more. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, now on Thanksgiving week, she actually comes home and works the whole week from home for the 3 days before Thanksgiving. And it costs us a lot less. And she doesn't have to travel from Wednesday to Sunday.
Yeah.
So I look at it as work-life integration. And, you know, when you can have that, it's important. And I also talk about leaving loudly. So if you have to leave and you're going to coach your kid's game or, you know, running to the doctor, or you need to take your dog for a walk in the afternoon, to actually tell people, because that's what actually makes the culture real.
Leave loudly. I haven't heard that before. I like that a lot. I like that phrase. So don't just kind of like sort of sneak out the door. Just it's okay to let people know that you're going.
Yeah, because that way it's true flexibility and people are proud. We do Flex February and everyone shows pictures of where they work on our channels. And
wow. So you really, really embrace that work. Yeah. So I'm curious, there's actually been, and I'm sure you've seen and have heard this, and maybe even some of your clients have said this too, but a lot of organizations have actually been pushing back on workplace flexibility. I mean, there are some like Ketchum who are very much embracing it and are all about it. And other companies are kind of like, I don't know, I got to be able to see them working. Was this a challenge for you to kind of move towards that environment? Did you get any pushback from other leaders?
Yeah. We definitely have gotten pushback, even within our own leaders. It took us really, as I said, a full almost year and a half, I think, before it was 100% embraced. And we train on it every January. And as we bring in new employees, I think a couple things. One is, I mean, we are a business where people, when you're in a client service business, our clients are thrilled when people are working nights and they're answering their phone at 10 o'clock at night and weekends when you need them. So my feeling is now there's a lot less resentment for that. You work on a Sunday, you don't need to get a comp day, and you need to, on Monday morning, to do your laundry and get your life errands run and come in, and your clients are happy and we're happy. It's awesome. So to me, it's really given us the ability to, I think, be better at client service, put our client at the center of their needs, but also be able to tune in and tune out as our people need to rejuvenate and re-energize and just sometimes get shit done in your life that you didn't do yesterday.
So I mean, it sounds like it's getting rid of the 5-day work. It's like there's no weekends and weekdays anymore. It's just sort of like 7 days a week. You just do what you need to do during those 7 days, take off the days that you need. You make your own weekend. It's just kind of like up to you.
Up to you. So, you know, we used to have summer Fridays and whatever, but now a lot of our people, you know, I live in New York here, and they go out to Fire Island in the Hamptons. They don't want to travel on a Friday because the traffic is miserable.
Yep.
They go out Saturday morning and come back Monday afternoon now, right? And if that works for them and it's better for them, or they could go out Thursday, work from there on Friday. And as long as they're productive and meet their meetings and their clients are happy. Now, a couple things we do is we do a ton more video. So no one does a call with me and they're not on video unless maybe it's, you know, really early in the morning or late at night in Asia or something. I'm like, all right, you can be in your pajamas, whatever, you know, but I mean, the truth is we use technology, so people have to be present. So you need to show up in a certain way. We've also had to invest in technology so people can be mobile and work remote and still be connected to all their files and their things. So we do a lot of training. We use a lot of tools for team meetings and things like that, and, you know, shareable files. So we definitely have shifted. And I think that's happening everywhere, but I could pretty much, you know, on any of my devices, get into our systems, pull things up, have team files, do video calls, all of that. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is it's not like you're hiding out behind the phone, but you're really.
So aside from workplace flexibility, which clearly is something that a lot of your employees care about, are there any other things that that you've noticed your workforce is wanting or needing? For example, like free food, gorgeous offices. Like, is that stuff that they ask about, or is it?
You know, Space, I would think space is interesting. I would say we've gone much more to open space due to the Omnicom philosophy. So we don't control our real estate as much as we would like in some places. But a couple other things I would say. We really look at what belonging at Ketchum means. And when we talk about belong at Ketchum, we talk about diversity, equality, and inclusion. And we have a very millennial group of people. So we've done a lot of things in that area. One of my favorite is we actually created something called Launchpad, which is when we look at entry-level people, it's a blind system. So if you're applying right now to our summer internship program, you will apply. We gamified it. So you go into a gamification process in January, you put ideas in, your peers vote you up, and we meet with the people who are on the top of the leaderboard. So things like that we're working on.
So you don't know their age in advance, like you don't have all these details.
We don't know where they went to school, their age, because there's a lot of unconscious bias, right? People connect with people because, oh, they went to a good school, or they were in my sorority, or they were in, so we're really trying to work at eliminating that. And then once people join, we're really trying to look at inclusion. We created an external DE&I advisory board about 1.5 years ago. And the first thing they did, they came to me and they said, well, in the US, our maternity policy is bias. And I was like,
interesting.
What do you mean? And they said, well, it really needs to stand for parental leave. And we have a lot of people that are LGBT and pride and people that are adopting and doing different things. So we renamed it. We now call it a family bonding policy. They said to me, we had an offer to pay for a lactation consultant. And they said, well, that's not really inclusive. Not everyone wants to breastfeed. So we now have multiple options. You can do sleep. Everybody needs sleep training for their baby, lactation. So what we're trying to do, and I think words matter, how you position things matter in that business, but also how things are truly inclusive. So I think those things are important. And the other thing I would say is we have a lot of millennials, right? We have tons of,
What percentage would you say of your workforce is millennials?
I mean, our average age of, our core is probably between 27 and 32. So it's
wow.
So when you look at that, we do a lot around being what we call a force for good. And being a force for good is our own, Ketchum giving back and work that we do, whether it's volunteering in our communities or pro bono, but also really pulling that through on being a force for good for how you inspire and support your colleagues and clients and the type of work we do for clients. So this past year, I mean, we've won a lot of awards and done great work for tons of clients. Like for MasterCard, we did, I don't know if you saw the street sign, Acceptance Matters, and we had a street sign in New York with all the different terms for gay that became during Pride Month and then stayed on in New York because it became such an icon, and true name cards. We did a lot of work for the National Safety Council that won awards around the opioid crisis, right? So we're not only trying to volunteer, but trying to really put our creatives to work to help our clients do good as well.
I love that. And I actually want to talk a little bit more about the do good stuff. But before we even get into that, I'm still interested in the kind of the blind process that you have for people who apply.
Okay.
So you don't even look at schools, because I know for a lot of companies out there, you got to come from a Harvard, a Stanford, you got to come from a UC, like you have to come from a certain tier school. Why did you guys used to do that and you got rid of it?
We did. So at the entry level, and particularly for our summer interns, and we get thousands of applications every year. And what we were finding is we struggle as an industry, I'll be honest, at getting a diverse enough workforce. And so
every industry struggles.
Yeah,
hard.
We do a lot of training on unconscious bias, but it wasn't enough. So this allows us, and literally, I remember like the highest score the first time. My husband and I have loved summer camp, and my husband's a summer camp director. So this was near and dear to my heart. Is the person that scored the highest, his summer jobs had been all at summer camp. He would have probably never gotten an interview. And yet his creativity and stuff, was off the charts. So what we're trying to do is eliminate those things and let it be based, particularly at the younger levels, at your ideas, how you engage, how you communicate through the gamification, how much you play, and how involved you are. There's a lot of things that we can see through that. And then we do go through an interview process from that. So in a sense, it's right. It's just an ability to then be a real screening tool. But what we find is exactly that. We don't have everyone from the same top communication schools. And we've even hired some people that haven't even gone to college, which is great that we might not that have run their own blogs or podcasts or created followings as influencers. And the other thing today is we're looking for much more diverse talent. So, we have people that just do influencer marketing. We have people that are in change management and doing, a lot of design and infographics and visuals and visual storytellers and things like that. So the backgrounds we need also are very different.
No, I completely can relate to that. I mean, I have obviously much smaller team than you. I have a team of 10 people that I work with. And for me, when I was looking to bring these 10 people on, I didn't look at their schools. I just looked at, can you do this kind of work? If you're creating an image, are you a great designer? If you're helping with writing, are you a good writer? And for me, all the other stuff didn't even become a factor at all. And I'm glad to see that that's something that you guys are doing and thinking about too. You mentioned something earlier. Actually, there are two things that you mentioned earlier, which I thought were interesting. One was you said it's better to be trusted than it is to be liked. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit, because I feel like in a lot of businesses, even as leaders or as individual contributors, we try very, very hard to be liked. Why do you think that that's not as important as being trusted?
I think that we're all in these moments where whether it's with your leadership team, the people you're managing, you're going to make decisions, and people might not like that decision in the moment. They might not like the way you're, conducting something, or, if you're doing layoffs, people aren't going to be happy with you. If they understand what you're doing and it's for the best of the business and what that means, then they're going to trust you and follow you in the future. If it's all about liked and you're so worried about, everyone being nice and being liked, a lot of times we make decisions and we do things not for the good of the whole, but for the good of individuals. And then it becomes a popularity contest. And I believe often you end up not being as popular as you think.
Yeah.
So I think that in order to be a true leader, you have to earn that trust every day. And some days it's going to be harder for everyone to like you, but overall, it's going to be better for business if they trust where you're coming from and understand the mechanics and how you think. And people will say to me, even sometimes after we've made some tough decisions, that, I know you care about people. I know you care about those things, because they see the consistent behavior right year round too. It's not, and I'm not one way in the New York office and another way in the Mumbai office and another way in London. I'm consistent when I travel with how I interact and what I say and what I do. And that's really important for people.
Is there a story or an example from your life or career that you can think of that sort of illustrates this idea of being trusted versus liked? Because it sounds like this is something you had to learn through experience. So how did you come to that realization? Did something happen?
So I think, as I said, I grew up in the South, and there was a lot of things where I was always trying to, be accepted and liked. And what I started to realize sometimes is I was carrying a lot of angst and guilt and emotion over things and keeping it inside. And sometimes, you'd let someone go and you wouldn't tell anyone why, because you'd 100% want to protect them. And then people wouldn't really understand the behaviors that you expected. We still struggle with that sometimes at Ketchum, though, I'll be honest, because we care so much about our people. We want to protect their reputation. And so how do you, though, really say these are the behaviors we expect people to do in these roles? And when people don't do them, you have to be honest and give that feedback. So I think part of it is about fast feedback. No one should ever be surprised at an annual review. To me, it should be that you're giving them that feedback all the time. And truthfully, no one should be surprised when people are let go for behaviors that aren't right for the organization if you're consistent about what you expect, right? But that's not being nice to everyone. That's holding people accountable. And by holding people accountable to certain standards, I think it's one of the ways you really build trust.
Makes sense. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. The other thing that I think you mentioned, which was interesting, you said you had to reinvent yourself several times during your career. And I think now with this rapid pace of change that we're all a part of, we're all going to have to reinvent ourselves many times during our career. So can you talk about some of those reinventions that you did? And is there a process for reinvention, or how do you go about doing that?
Well, we talk a lot about in our culture about being an ongoing learner and curiosity, right? And I think you hire people for curiosity, people that are always looking to what's new, to try to reskill at times. I mean, when I got into this business, it was all about writing. I'll never forget it. Burson Marsteller, John Artopius was like, former New York Times editor, and you could not get a press release out the door until he approved it. And he took that red pen and you'd be like, oh my God, I was afraid of his office, right? And today, I mean, we hardly put out a press release. I mean, you do for, financials and things like that, but so much more of it is, right, visual storytelling. And I remember at a point when I had taken on digital, and I insisted at one point that if you were writing the video script or writing the shot list and you were a client director, that it probably wasn't good enough. And people looked at me and said, but we've always done. We became writers, then we started writing the video scripts. I said, no, you're not that person anymore. We have a million producers and things, but that adoption curve, right, of getting people to make those shifts is really not always easy. And I think some people adopted technology really quickly, some people didn't. I remember at one point, I actually really am a big believer in reverse mentors. And I had some of our best young digital people mentoring me. And at the time, it was when everyone wanted a blog, right? And I said, okay, we all started personal blogs and tried to keep it going and all of that, and worked at it. And, then when I launched my LinkedIn or Twitter, I had people working with me that were helping me in those areas, because it's not so intuitive or easy for people of our, generation compared to my kids who were in their 20s, who kind of grew up with that in their hand. And I can now type with my thumbs faster than most. I will race pretty much. But those are all, even, I mean, you think about that, right? Basic skills. Every time you get a new device, you got to dive in.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking of like, in my career, just like the things that I had to learn, when I went off on my own, like 15 years ago, social media wasn't even really a thing. Just even how you build a brand, how you do all these things is transformed rapidly. So how do you have a process that you use to learn new things? Is it like an upskilling and training program that you guys offer? Do people just speak up inside of Ketchum and say, I want to learn this? Or what's that process like?
So I think it's a combination. I mean, what we try to do is we provide a lot of training. Influencer marketing took off. We created something called InfluCon, which was our influencer training. We trained about 200 people in a year and really have brought them along. And some of them were people that just opted in, and some of them were people we hired. Similar, we do a lot of web, and we've worked with a company called Nomadic. So there's a lot of training you can do on your own as we've been evolving analytics and AI and what that means. And then in addition to Ketchum University and the courses we offer, we have LinkedIn Learning. So a lot of times our people want to do that. I just recently met with our L&D team, and two of the top courses people were using on LinkedIn Learning were one was around stress management.
Wow.
And one was around time management, right? And so those are things people might not want to opt into in the day-to-day, but they can do that on their own, right? And we have people doing photography and other things too. So there's a little bit of that. We also have a tuition reimbursement program. And then Omnicom, for our leaders, has a great leadership program where they build custom Harvard Business Study kind of case studies on leading agencies, and they have cases from all different agencies around the network. So, and then I also think, though, and I'm sure you do too, a lot of it is, reading, understanding things. I mean, I remember when I was starting to look at blockchain and AI and what that meant and what was that going to mean for our business. And if you asked me 3 or 4 years ago, as I was educating myself on it, I wasn't sure. And now our influencer marketing databases are all AI enabled. They're using, right, artificial intelligence to identify people like you that might have a certain reach, a certain following, a certain influence in an industry or specialty. And then we're vetting them for our clients based on tone and other things after that. But the short list that we create is all done through AI today.
Very cool. I want to ask you a little follow-up to that, but first, somebody live was asking, are you the same leader for your kids as you are for your employees?
That's a great question.
That's what I said to him too.
So, I try to be a great coach for them. I have a son and daughter. My son is a systems engineer in the aerospace and space innovation industry.
Wow.
And, one of the things that he'll tell you is how he got his job at Northrop Grumman now. But when he was getting his first internship, he'll say, my mom packaged me. And I literally taught him how to do, a whole virtual online LinkedIn and 360 and personal branding and all of that, right? And engineers never do that stuff. So he totally stood out and created video and other things. I work with my daughter a lot. I think girls do grow up having a little bit tougher confidence and things like that. One of the things when she went to college, I gave her confidence cards that are photos and sayings, a lot of them with her in them. And I actually keep a whole set on my desk.
That's super cool.
So, I try to instill a lot of the things I impart as leaders on, my kids as well. But, I often do things sometimes, raising a lot of young people in the office is a little bit like parenting, right? There's a lot of similarities, no doubt. And sometimes my CFO and I joke that we need consistent parenting. Mom and dad have to be aligned.
I couldn't agree more. I think that makes a lot of people, especially in leadership management roles, can probably relate to that, especially if you're running a company that you said the average age was like between 25 to 32.
Yeah, I'm catching up with that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you're staying on top of things like AI and blockchain and all these different technologies that are out there. One of the things that I found, at least from interviewing a lot of the CEOs for my upcoming book, is that a lot of people have a very hard time keeping up with the pace of change and just adapting to stuff that's happening. What do you do to stay current? Are you just always reading the news? Like, how do you keep a pulse on how the world and your business is changing?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting today because I would say, one of the things I kind of miss sometimes is reading a newspaper cover to cover, because I often say, you'd read the arts section and get things and others, and now we opt into so many things. So I try to follow a lot of different types of people, different industries, and whether that's on, some of the key channels. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, right, all of those. But I also pick people every day that I trust to curate information too. So like when Alan Murray for Fortune does like a CEO morning newsletter, and I get a lot of the business news from that. And then I can go down into deeper stories, right? But there's the same, you have different people you follow for tech and different people you follow for cultural trends. And it's harder and harder to keep up. I will say that. I find the pace of change is really quick. So sometimes what I'll do is start the year in January. I have the luxury of many times going to Davos or other big economic meetings in the beginning of the year. And I'll try to focus on a few things a year, things I think that are emerging. So I followed blockchain for a year until I felt like I could understand it. I followed AI, and I still do, because I think there's a lot of ramifications to what that's doing for the business. But sometimes, too, I'll follow some of the top creatives, like Audio, I find is a really interesting company that's innovating products, to look at what they're innovating and things that they're looking at. And, we've done a lot of work in the 50 plus category, and they're doing a lot of universal design. So how do those things link up, and to try to make the connections for people and for a lot of trends too, right? We're seeing like a lot of employees get more engaged in issues and employee activism. So when you start to see that, then you start to follow and say, okay, how can we as a communications agency and internal get engaged and help our clients with employee activism? So connecting a lot of those dots as well.
So one follow-up question from earlier, that same person said, is there anything that you do at home for your kids that you would apply at work?
I think that for whether it's kids or people at work, I really try to encourage to get the best out of them and not to impart the way I manage or the way I would do something. My kids are both very different in terms of how they approach things. And one's much more left brain, one's much more right brain. So how you get to the end process and what that end process looks like is going to be different. And I think I've learned at work, particularly my work style, I skip steps. And a lot of people can't do that. So if I have to write a speech, I will, on the train while I'm walking, create something in my head. And when I go to paper, I can sometimes just write something. And people want the outline step and they want me to look at the outline and make sure I agree with the outline, right? And so it used to make me crazy. And now I'm like, okay, that's their process and way to get through that. And this is my process. And I've had to learn to do that with my kids and with people at work, is accept that different outcomes are different and different processes are different.
I like that. What does a typical day look like for you? Maybe you can walk us through from when you wake up in the morning to when you're done. What's your day like?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I love about this industry is the days are very different, but I would say there's certain things. I mean, I'm either commuting on the train or I'm on a plane or something. So I usually, my early morning time is usually something commuting where I have time to read, answer emails from the night before, do a little bit of thinking or editing if I need to. I do a lot of client meetings and new business pitches and things like that. So every week I'm usually having to be a quick study on what I'm going into, or, the industry or where we are with a client. I spend a lot of time with our leaders around the world. So trying to listen and coach. And one of the things I find that I can do a lot because I travel and hear so much of our working clients is be the connector and bring ideas together and thoughts together and help people say, have you thought about this? Or in this industry, they're doing this or that. So being a connector. I go out a lot. I'm very social, both with my friends and with business. I try to make time for my friends and family every week. It's really important to me. So my assistant knows if I'm out certain nights of the week, I want to be home here or do this. And last week was crazy because we had a lot of business things. And on Friday night, I had 22 people at my house till 1 a.m. so that we could all catch up and make sure that part of my life, it's important to me. I always feel like if I'm going to work this hard, I want that. I'm leaving tomorrow on vacation for my mom's 80th birthday this weekend.
Nice.
I never leave a vacation day on the table. I can promise you that.
So you take advantage of your vacation days?
Everyone. When I actually became CEO 2 years ago, I was becoming CEO in January. I found out 2 months before, and I had a bucket list vacation set. It was kind of when my kids, before my daughter was going to college and my son was graduating, to go to on a safari. And my first day of being a CEO, I was abroad on vacation. Everyone wanted me to do this, day in the life and blah, blah, blah. And I literally wrote a letter to our entire workforce telling them not to leave a vacation day on the table and that I never would. And I can't wait to be back next week, but I'm with my family and that's what's important to start the year. And that sets a tone, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying, it's one thing to send an email to everybody about that, but if you yourself aren't practicing it as a leader, then you can say whatever you want. I don't think people will take it seriously. And if you say you believe in workplace flexibility and all that sort of stuff, yet you're in the office constantly and take your vacation days, but you never take them, be a leader and a coach, but you never coach anybody, then I think the other stuff is just going to be words. So I love that you are literally leading by example, and people can see that physically and everything. So it's wonderful.
People with that email were so funny because they would all write me back and go, this is the most amazing email, but I guess you're not going to answer it because you're on vacation.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you mentioned when we first started talking is personal branding. And this is something, at least for me, I have had to do very well over 15 years, because when you work for yourself, you have to build a personal brand. Otherwise, nobody's going to know who you are. Do you think that full-time employees or people who work for an organization, do they need a personal brand too? And if so, why?
I think everyone needs a personal brand, because your brand is, even if it's an internal brand, right? Your brand is a leader, what you stand for, what you're passionate about. I mean, people want to work for people that are passionate, that have interests, that have dimension. For me, I've been lucky because I've been able to blend those. I talk a lot about my striving to focus on women's equity and women in leadership. And some of that came because of one of my early trips to the World Economic Forum, where I actually thought in our industry we were in pretty good shape, and we actually weren't. And I had a young daughter at the time, and I realized that, I was one of 16% women at this conference, and I looked around, and it was the first time I was ever in a minority. And I thought, oh my gosh, now as a leader, I'm in the minority. What am I going to do about that? So I've done a lot of work in that area. I just was on the chair of the board of Step Up, helping young high school girls reach their full potential. And so I can do what I am at work and what I am in my personal life. I've blended together in a lot of ways, and I feel lucky for that, and kind of talk about it as my minor. But I think that, when people know what you stand for, even if it's totally different, you could be, a poet in your spare time and a business person. People want to see that authentic you, and they want to understand what you're all about, and they want to work for people that I think have more dimension and a brand and stand for things.
There are two phrases that I've heard different executives mention.
Okay.
I've heard some people say, bring your whole self to work.
Yeah.
And I've heard other people say, bring your best self to work. And I'm kind of curious.
They're not always one and the same, right?
I mean, yeah, but where would you stand on that? Because, bring your best self, to me, when I hear that, it sort of implies like, bring your worth ethic, don't bring your problems, just bring kind of like what you're good at and what your strengths are. Whereas bring your whole self, to me, implies you can bring everything with you. And if you have challenges and problems and your strengths, you can just be your complete self at work.
Yeah.
Where would you stand on that? Whole self or best self?
I'm a whole self gal, I have to say. I mean, I think, look, we all go through a lot. I remember, unfortunately, my father passed away, and he was sick with cancer for 7 months. And my sisters and I, one of us went every Friday home. And during that time, there's a lot going on. And I think was I there with my best self every day? No. But if I was authentic and people knew that, people can support and help you through those moments. And I think that is real. So I hope most days I have my best self here, and I'm all in, and I, work hard. But when you're whole self, you're a little more vulnerable. And I think leaders and people, when you're a little more vulnerable and help each other and support each other, that to me is one of the reasons I've stayed at Ketchum for so long. And I think a lot of our people stay, is it's a culture that accepts you on the good days and the tough days, and often, has to lift you up and support you or surround you. And, most days, yes, I want to be my best self, but I'm not sure everyone can have their best self at work every day.
Well, you also mentioned vulnerability, which I know is something a lot of leaders struggle with. How do you become vulnerable at work? Because a lot of companies, it's very much like, I got to have the best ideas. Everybody needs to think that I know everything. I got to be, kind of like the perfect employee or the perfect leader. How can you start to become more vulnerable at work?
Well, I think vulnerability comes with confidence, ironically, right? Because when you're a confident leader, it's okay to say, I'm not good at everything. I mean, we've gone through a huge shift to a consultancy, and we changed our model from P&Ls by geography to industries and specialties. And when we started the process a year ago, one of the things, we stumbled some in the beginning a little bit. And what I said to the team is, I underestimated some of the infrastructure changes and reporting and things behind what we were doing that we needed to do to enable people to have the information. That took us a while to catch up. And I could have pretended like nothing was wrong and, oh, what's your problem? You can't, figure this out. But instead, we talked a lot about, I said, as a leader, this is something I underestimated. We brought in an outside consultant. We got help. We fixed it. We got people involved in giving us feedback on it, right? And those things, I think when you do that, actually, people give you more time. They also rally and become more resilient and figure out how to do it with the information they have. So they were kind of all in to help and helped push us through a time until we got things exactly right. So to me, that capability, and also to bring different thinkers and different people with different opinions around. So I think I talked earlier about debate. I think, a lot of leaders that aren't vulnerable, put certain people around them that aren't going to challenge them, that aren't going to make them think differently, that aren't going to take the business in a different direction. And there's many times when other people's ideas are way better than mine. And so to be able to sit back and listen and learn and acknowledge and embrace that, to me, is, much more fun way to lead.
Do you offer like vulnerability training? I know that sounds weird, but is there, and I love that you said vulnerability comes with confidence.
Maybe you
How do
have to
you
come up with the course. I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like, do you have, or have you had people, for example, at Ketchum, or maybe even at a previous job where you say, vulnerability is important, and they look at you and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, there is no way I'm doing that.
I mean, we've definitely coached certain executives I've worked with and some of our clients and things through, because I think building followership takes vulnerability, takes kind of that bringing your whole self to work. And there's a lot of really great people I work with, and they're so smart, but they're not so successful, right? And so often, if you can help coach them to bring that in, to listen more to others, to be a little bit more vulnerable, they realize that they're going to get much more followership and get a lot more done and get people working harder for them. I find sometimes, and you've all been there, when you're in a room with the smartest person in the room, people just sit back and they wait for the person to tell them what to do. And they're not leaning forward and they're not all in because they know that they're not so important as the person in the room. And you see that in a lot of meetings, and you even see the body language sometimes when a boss walks in the room and the team, there's been a robust discussion around a table and a senior person walks in and the energy shifts. Big difference.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things, though, I will say that is coming to mind that I did learn early on, it's a kind of a little game you can play with yourself called green light, yellow light, red light. Okay.
Oh, I think I know this one.
Have you had that, right? So you have a meeting in your office and you mark on your calendar after, did the people leave more energized? They would get green light. Did they leave less, red light, or kind of neutral? And what the findings are, if you do it, is if you take their ideas and you change them and you don't support them and you don't brainstorm with them and they leave and the ideas are different, they usually leave less energized. If you coach them and give them feedback and they can evolve it themselves, then they're more energized, they own it. So there's a lot of techniques. So that is a little bit of that vulnerability training, maybe not exactly, but the closest thing I can think of.
Got it. I know we only have a couple minutes left. One of the people watching live says they love that vulnerability comes with confidence. They love that quote. But her question was, if vulnerability comes from confidence, do you have any tips or suggestions on how to build confidence? If you're a leader, or maybe if you're not a leader at all, how do you start?
Yeah, so I do, and do you know if it's a male or a woman? Because I think there's sometimes different.
It's a female.
It's a female. So one of the things I talk to a lot of women about is being able to speak up confidently and not apologize. A lot of us say, I'm not sure this is a good idea, but, or, women walk in a room and they apologize for being 3 minutes late. Men walk in a room and are 7 minutes late and say, oh, the meeting can start now, I'm here, right? So some of it is tone and attitude and getting more confident, even in how you speak and present. So I often tell people to pick a buddy in your office and really help each other make sure that the language and the way you're presenting things is confident. Because I think that's part of it, is feeling that confidence in how you talk and how you enter a room. I also think that rehearsing sometimes and practicing can give you confidence. So, and it's not the idea of perfecting, because perfecting is different. So a lot of times I talk about women will sit there and they'll edit the PowerPoint and make it better. And, the men are at the bar pre-selling their ideas while the women are, perfecting it. And it's true. So what I say is get it to where it's good enough, and then practice your presentation and how you're going to talk about it and how you're going to bring it to life in a room, and then go and pre-sell it so that you're more confident when you walk in the room, because some of the people around the table are already proponents of what you're going to present. So there's ways to build in that confidence. So over time, you don't always feel like, sometimes you need to pre-sell because it's a controversial idea. Sometimes you get more confident and don't, because you know you can be persuasive in the room. And the last thing I would say is there are persuasion techniques and debate techniques, right, and things that you can use that help you better prepare and present more confidently. So sometimes even we do a lot of media training and presentation skills training, and a lot of it is videotaping people and playing it back to them and looking at their body language, their words, how they're communicating, how they're leaning forward or leaning back. The worst thing to do before you go into presentation or interview is be like this on your phone. There's tons of data, right? Because your body's down, your shoulders are down, your body language versus being open and up. So you're way better off stretching for 3 minutes, even if it's in the bathroom, and raising your and, you know, some of that power posing. So there's a lot of things that build confidence and a lot of techniques for you to try.
I remember, you know, when I first started speaking and just looking at some of my old speaking videos, there was a dramatic change and a big difference in sort of my posture and how I delivered things. And I even remember when I had Marshall, my dog is saying hi. I don't know if you can. Even when I had Marshall Goldsmith as a podcast guest a couple of years ago, and I was interviewing him, and he would like call me out for certain words that I would use as fillers. I would say things like "so" or "I think" or "maybe," and he would say, "Jacob, you're doing it again. Stop saying that." And so he like called me out on the podcast for doing this. And ever since then, I've been very conscientious of just like the words that I use. And I think those tips are fantastic, and they're certainly applicable, I think, to men and to women as well.
No doubt. And having a buddy to help you, right? So call out those things and remind you is very helpful.
I share a home office with my wife, so she's constantly calling me out on things, and I call her out on things, so it works out very well.
I like it. And clearly your dog does too. So
yes, I don't know what's going on downstairs. I think there was a package delivered or something. So apologize to everybody that got a little Yorkie in your ear. We have just like 3 minutes left. I was going to ask you about diversity and inclusion. Maybe we can just talk about that for 1 minute before we wrap up. Can you share why diversity and inclusion is so important, and what are you guys doing about it, if anything, at Ketchum?
Yeah. So we are working hard at it. I think particularly in a business like ours, where we're consulting clients on audience segmentation, on what kind of creative resonates, what are the right messages, right? And it is around, diversity is around age, right? We need different age ranges in our organization. We need people, we do a lot of work in the food space, and we need people that are, you know, from farms and living not in the big cities on the East and West Coast, right? And in different countries. So what we try to really look at for diversity is all different types of diversity and different backgrounds and different socioeconomic backgrounds and different points of view. And, you know, if I'm in my DC office or my London office, I need people on different political points of view, right? So I also think we have a pretty broad view of diversity. We all need to work better at racial diversity in our business, and we try that. We're trying to do things where we're even starting now at the high school level, getting more people to go into some of the fields that we're in. We work with a lot of different universities. I work closely here in New York with City College to make sure we're bringing, you know, different diverse students into our halls and through Step Up and others. And then, you know, creating things like unconscious bias training, inclusion. Ah, there he is.
For people on the video, I know if you're listening to the podcast, you can't see this dog.
There you
go. For people who are live on video, you can see that this is the one who's been making all the noise.
I will say we talked about workplace before, and Pets at Ketchum is one of our favorite, most active groups. And so your picture would be posted right now from a client meeting, and they would love it, or a live podcast, right? So there you go. But that is inclusive, right? I mean, it's making sure that people, back to bringing your whole self, that people feel like they can. And if they can, you're going to get better creative, better thinking for clients, better consulting. So we're all working at it. I don't think I have some businesses within my own organization that I think do it even better than others, and some offices that do it better than others. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah, and diversity and inclusion are not the same thing. I mean, I think you touched on it, right? Diversity is just about the mix of people, and inclusion is about making them feel like they belong and can show up to work each day. So I'm glad to hear that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I know we just have like 30 seconds. Maybe we can end on, what is your best piece of advice for people who are watching who want to become better leaders? Anything that they should do or focus on from your experience?
I would say build a style that's authentic to you, right? The style that's authentic to me. You know, it's a great question, whoever asked about, you know, are you the same as a parent, as a leader? I think if you have to put on one persona at home and one persona at work, it's hard to be an authentic leader. So if you can build it from, you know, your personality. Some of us are introverts, some of us are more extroverts, some are more expressive, some are more amiables, right? Is you have to start with that foundation and then build around it the leadership skills. But if you can show up at work as a leader true to your core, I think you're going to be a better leader no matter what.
So you can learn from others, but don't try to copy what other people do. You have to be yourself.
Yeah. So take those skills that you want to emulate and make them your own. You know, don't just try to say, oh, he did it that way, so I'm going to do that. It's, he did it that way, but for me, that way might mean X.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Well, that was the very last question I had for you. Where can people go to learn more about you or Ketchum? You mentioned you're on LinkedIn, Instagram, all these different places. So anything you want to mention, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is Barri, Barri, is not really spelled that way from anyone else. So if they call and say Mr. Barri Rafferty, I say, oops, sorry, not here. So my LinkedIn, my Twitter, my Instagram, everything are under those names. So do follow me. I try to share a lot of leadership tips through our Ketchum channels. We have a Ketchum blog that also has a lot of this information, and we love to share it. And feel free to ask more questions after through this or through my channels as well. We'll kind of combine and make sure we cross channels to help everyone. It's been really fun. And you were right, an hour did go pretty quick.
I told you. Everybody always says, oh my goodness, it's 60 minutes and it flies right by. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your day. And thanks everyone for tuning in, everyone who is live and everyone who's watching, or I should say listening to the podcast later. My guest, again, has been Barri Rafferty. She is the CEO at Ketchum, and I will see all of you next time.